I'm Annie Nash. I am going to be teaching you how to make shrimp étouffée today. If you haven't heard of shrimp étouffée, it is a Cajun dish so if the Cajun food comes from the New Orleans area of Louisiana, and it's something I've grown up loving to eat. So I'm gonna chop up some things for you and teach you how to make this delicious dish. But first, wine. Another thing that you always have to start out with something like this is the rice. So I often forget to start cooking the rice at the beginning, but we're gonna start with the rice. So for the rice, you just use my favorite kitchen appliance, which is the rice cooker. And I put a cup of rice and a cup and a half of water. I realize I only have a half cup of rice over there, so I'm gonna grab my rice. There we go. The reason why it's my favorite cooking appliance is because you literally press 2 buttons and then you get rice. It's perfect. There we go. Now I've got a lot of chopping and a lot of shrimp peeling to do. I'm gonna start by chopping. We've got celery. I'm gonna take, the recipe calls for a half cup of celery. I normally just kind of eyeball it, and I'm gonna call that 2 stalks. 2 stalks of celery. I was gonna call it sprigs. It's not a sprig, it's a stalk. Something about celery I always notice is that you can only really buy celery in pretty good quantities. I'm only using 2 stalks of the celery, or I don't know, is this the stalk or is an individual one a stalk? Who knows? So I'm only using 2 of those out of this whole thing. And so sometimes the rest of the celery goes to waste. Something you can do is pre-chop celery and freeze it, and then it's just ready for you. So I do forget to do that every time, and then I remember when I'm, making a cooking show. You can pre-chop celery and mix it with other pre-chopped things like pepper, because the combination of celery, pepper, and onion when cooked together is called a mirepoix, which is the base of a lot of Cajun dishes as well as I think some French dishes. I'm pretty sure it's celery, pepper, and onion. It might be celery, onion, and garlic, but a combination of 3 of those things is called mirepoix. And it's awesome. It's the base of a lot of really wonderful dishes, including étouffée and gumbo. So you can pre-chop celery, you can pre-chop pepper, but I would not suggest pre-chopping and freezing onion. It just doesn't keep its flavor. It gets a little slimier, whereas the celery and the pepper will keep their flavor. So I'm cutting up, what do I have? I have a half cup green bell pepper. I'm just gonna chop up the whole thing. I think it'll be fine. I've never made this dish and not had it literally be perfect. So a couple things about shrimp étouffée, especially because every time I mention it to my friends around here that grew up here, a lot of people don't know what it is. It's very similar to a gumbo, which is a stew. That is a Cajun dish. One difference is that there's no okra in étouffée. Also, it doesn't take as long to make, and I'm not really sure why. It does start with a roux, like an étouffée, and a mirepoix, like an étouffée, or like a gumbo, I meant. But it doesn't take quite as long. And personally, I prefer this shrimp étouffée over the gumbo that I like to make. My dad taught me how to make both, and my family really thrives off of my dad's gumbo and my dad's étouffée, and therefore here I am passing it along. Most things I cook, if I have wine, I might pour some wine into what I'm cooking, but this recipe stands alone without wine in it, so I'll just keep the wine to myself. I didn't chop quite the whole bell pepper, but I think this is plenty, so I've got about, probably a third of the bell pepper left. And I'm just putting all of the things that I've chopped so far in the same bowl, because the celery and bell pepper and onion are all gonna go in at the same time. And I mean the full onion, the yellow onion versus the green onion I'm gonna add at the very end. So I do have a little trick to cutting onions. I bet everyone does. I like to cut onions in a way that makes it go a little faster, so I have to suffer through the eye irritation a little less long. I cut the onion in half at the root, like so, and then I peel the onion. This is also a trick my dad taught me. He is definitely the chef in our family. I've benefited a lot from my dad's wonderful cooking. He learned from my grandmother, but he's also taught himself quite a bit. So my trick is, once you've peeled your half onion, you go in and cut. Here's the center of the onion. You're gonna cut like a sun ray into the onion, like so. That way I've got my onion all still attached at the root, but these pre-cuts make it so when I go in to slice this way, bada bing, bada boom, we've got chopped onion. And I'm not even crying yet. Though I'm not promising anything. I might cry. It's always a possibility. All right. I'm going to cut my other onion as well. Ooh, now it's starting to irritate my eyes. Okay. I normally have here, I'm gonna grab a little bowl. I like to keep a little bowl next to where I'm cooking so I can just toss my compostable scraps right into the bowl. It makes it a lot easier than opening my compost bin every time I have compost, and then this is maybe a little bit too little of a bowl, but. Okay, next I'm gonna chop the garlic. My recipe says 2 tablespoons minced garlic, but if you are normal, then you love garlic. And I normally just add as much garlic as I feel like. And once again, it's never messed up this recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and do 4 good-sized cloves of garlic. I used to use like one of those red rolling rubber things to peel garlic, but I realized that you don't need one. All you need is a good knife and your body weight. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to peel the garlic. If you have fresh garlic, it'll peel a little bit differently than if you have older garlic. But to me, it just makes it come right off. It also kind of enlivens the taste of the garlic. It like squishes the juices together a little bit. And like when you're watching a cooking show, that's what they do. So now, because you're watching a cooking show, that's what I'm gonna do. So I grew up in Austin, Texas, which is a 13, 16-hour drive or something from New Orleans. I also spent a lot of my childhood, my elementary years in California, but my whole family's from Texas. And my grandfather really loved, my mom's mom really loved to go to New Orleans, and he would take us there. And my parents really love New Orleans, and they got a timeshare there a long time ago. So we really have spent a lot of time in New Orleans. It's kind of a not very difficult escape from Austin, and in my opinion, it's one of the most unique cities in the country that I've been to, at least. It really can feel like when you go to the French Quarter or when you're in the Garden District of New Orleans that you're in a different country, because the culture is so rich and the architecture is so interesting and the music is everywhere and the food is phenomenal. You just feel like you're in a different country. It doesn't really feel like you just went to another city in the United States. I don't have a trick to cutting garlic, I just cut it. One thing that's cool is I might mess this story up a little bit, so sorry Mom, but my great-grandfather worked during the war, and I say the war because I'm not really sure exactly when it was. He worked as a supplier for different cities of different, like when people were getting rations, when places were getting rationed food, and he was one of the people that got to choose what restaurants got what. He helped supply the rations for different places. And there's a really wonderful restaurant in New Orleans called Galatoire's. It's on Bourbon Street, but it's a really fancy restaurant that's pretty iconic. And my great-grandfather decided to supply Galatoire's with sugar. So he was a special guest there throughout his life. And I went there once with my grandfather, and we mentioned my great-grandfather's name, and it was still remembered. And that's just a really wonderful thing I take pride in, that my great-grandfather helped this really iconic restaurant keep making amazing food during a time when other places couldn't, because they weren't rationed the food. That being said, this recipe comes from a restaurant not far from Galatoire's in the French Quarter called the Gumbo Shop. My dad grew up in Waco, Texas, and he remembers going to a restaurant as a kid and eating gumbo and eating étouffée and really loving it. And then when my family started going to New Orleans, and he joined my family by marrying my mom, he realized that he could learn how to make gumbo and étouffée in New Orleans. So I believe my older sister went with him on this too. They went to a cooking class at the Gumbo Shop. Did they go to a cooking class, or did they get a cookbook? Either way, my dad ended up with a cookbook. I think he went to a cooking class, and that's where he learned how to make gumbo. And that was the first recipe he learned from New Orleans. And I am benefiting from that and sharing that recipe with y'all today. Once I start cooking, I will show you one of the tricks that was really important to making sure this recipe turns out just right, which is making sure the roux, which is the very first part of the cooking process, turns out. just right. Okay. So now I'm gonna peel the shrimp. Last time I made this, I forgot to peel the shrimp, and that's kind of a bummer. Every time I go to a nice restaurant and I get like fettuccine Alfredo with shrimp and they don't peel the shrimp, or they leave any of the peel on the shrimp, it really annoys me. So it was pretty hilarious last time I made this, which was a couple weekends ago in prep for the show, that I annoyed myself by cooking the entire thing and not peeling the shrimp. So everyone had to get their hands all in their food to peel their own shrimp. But today we're peeling, and I just got the frozen shrimp, easy peel shrimp. Works just fine. You can get more fresh if you want, but this works for me. They freeze it fresh, so seems good to me. And I'm only gonna take about half of what's in here because this is 2 pounds and we need 1 pound. I've let it defrost in the fridge, so we are good to go. It's really easy to peel shrimp, especially these easy peel shrimp. All I do is, you can see, I mean, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there's already sliced in the back, which is removing the little nasty bits. And then that makes it easy. You could just pinch the head of the fish, and then the shrimp and the meat just comes right out. One thing you can do, if you have room in your freezer and you're not gonna just completely forget about it, like I often do, is you can save the shrimp peels and freeze them. And you can also save all of the stuff that I put in the compost, all the cutoffs from the onions and celery and green bell pepper, and freeze that. And then you can make a shrimp stock or a veggie stock with that just by putting the frozen compost, the frozen shrimp shells in a pot with water and maybe some seasonings and letting it simmer for a while. And then you remove all of the stuff. You put the strainer and you freeze what's left over, or you can make a soup right away with it. And it's absolutely delicious. It's way better than, I mean, no offense, bouillon, but fresh stock is way better. I am gonna use bouillon tonight in this recipe because I did not prepare by making a shrimp stock in advance. Actually, we do have lobster stock in the freezer that I forgot. So that'll be used for later. So I'm gonna do a couple more and then I think we're good to start cooking. Okay, I'll wash my hands. Cheers. I'm gonna just completely get myself prepped. At the very end, I'm gonna add some green onion to this étouffée and parsley. So I'm just gonna get that completely prepped because I need to keep stirring this étouffée the whole time it cooks. So if I step away from it for too long, it could burn. So let's get it all prepped in advance. And these are the two things, the parsley and the green onions, that came from my backyard, which feels good. The green onions, I bought some green onions from the store and ate them down to the root, and then I planted the roots, and that's where this comes from. It's a lot cheaper than, I mean, is it a lot cheaper? I don't know. Green onions aren't that expensive, but it's still cool that I grew it myself. There we go. Okay, now we start cooking. I'm gonna start with the best thing in the world, butter. And yes, I'm using a whole stick of butter, which is a half cup. We're gonna turn the stove on. I'm gonna put it on medium heat. One thing to note, I've got a nice big Dutch oven that can get nice and hot. My dad actually got this for me when I was in college so that I could cook gumbo for my friends. And I did so very successfully. I managed to lose the lid at one point, but I still got the Dutch oven, and I actually have someone else lost their Dutch oven, so I got their lid. So we've got a mismatch lid and pot. So I start with, I chop up the butter to make it a little easier to melt. And then we are making a roux, which is just the combination of a fat and flour. So I'm going in with a 1/4 cup of flour. I'm using King Arthur flour, which we all know is the best. And one thing that's interesting, that the cookbook that my dad got from the gumbo shop does say when you're making a roux, one of the best ways to learn how to make a roux is to start your roux, let it cook, keep stirring, let it get really dark, and then let it burn. And that way you can see the colors that it turns into and the colors that you should be not turning it into. I'm not gonna let it burn today. We're not gonna throw it away, hopefully, knock on wood. But that's a good step, because when we do want it to get pretty dark, I actually meant to bring peanut butter so you could compare the color, because the color that we're going for is the color of peanut butter. So I'm dumping my flour into my butter, and here we go. We want to mix it up. And then I'm just going to keep continuously throughout this entire process scraping the bottom of the pot. Especially during this process. Like I said, our goal is to get the whole roux to be the color of peanut butter. If you let it sit, the bottom will get darker. The bottom will burn or cook faster, but the top won't. But when you mix it together, it will still look like it's all the consistent color. So if you keep stirring it, it all cooks consistently, scraping the bottom, preventing it from burning. And you can do this with one hand, which is convenient. There's going to be a lot of this. I have had such a blast coming here to GNAT-TV in Sunderland, and If you ever want to come host your own show, I highly suggest it. If you have a recipe, a family recipe that you love, that you think other people would love, come on down to GNAT and film your own cooking show. Ooh, and there's my rice. Awesome. It's pretty nice to not have to even think. I literally forgot that rice was cooking. And it's perfectly cooked, a lot better than it would have been if I had cooked it on the stove. That's why it's my favorite appliance. Get yourself a rice cooker. It's like an advertisement, but not. So we've been stirring for what? A couple minutes, 5 minutes, and the color has changed a little bit. But it takes time. It takes patience. And you really want it to cook all the way, or else it'll taste a little bit too floury. This is where if my dad were here, he would probably adjust the cooking and push me over and start stirring instead of me, but. It's starting to look a little bit like mustard. Okay, it's getting really close to the color I want it to be. And like I said, you want it to be close to burning, so I'm trying to be aware of cooking it as much as I can without burning it. But I think we're there. My dad will tell me when he watches later whether or not I actually got it to the color it's supposed to be. Am I there yet, Dad? Yeah, I think we're there. So now is the point where we add our mirepoix, our onions, our bell pepper, and our celery. And this is a moment that we always love because for some reason, this smell, the mirepoix going into the roux, smells just like a Chinese restaurant. And it's awesome. I literally would know my dad was cooking from upstairs. I knew we were having something good tonight. I've got a little chunk of something in there. Here. So at this point, you just want to cook the onions and the celery and the bell pepper like you normally would, which is until they're translucent and soft. It'll take a few minutes, and it's a little less important that you keep stirring it constantly because once we've gotten past that point with the roux where you're likely to burn the bottom of it and you've added the mirepoix in, it's a little less likely to burn on the bottom, but I do just stay at the stove and keep cooking just to make sure it's just right. But the onions, you do want to let them settle a little bit where they are. They're more likely to cook if you let them sit than constantly stirring. So that's what we're going to do. I probably could have chopped this bell pepper up a little bit smaller. It's still going to be good. Okay, it looks like my onions are pretty translucent. So we're going to move ahead with the next step, which is adding the garlic and all the spices. So I've got my garlic chopped up here. Probably more than the recipe calls for, but we're gonna go with it. I'm a garlic girl. And then I've got my cayenne pepper, which is, how much do I have of this? I've got a 1/4 tablespoon cayenne. I've got what is this? This is paprika. I've got a full tablespoon of paprika. I've got a half tablespoon of basil, dried basil. I've got a half tablespoon of white pepper and a half tablespoon of black pepper. And then I've got a full tablespoon of salt. And now I'm gonna stir all that in and let it cook for a couple minutes. Let those spices cook, let the garlic cook. And now it smells even better. So it's smelling incredible now. No more, it doesn't smell like a Chinese restaurant anymore. It's starting to smell a little bit like a Cajun restaurant. If you're interested in the recipe and you can't quite follow along with what I'm saying, go ahead and come down to GNAT and they'll give you the recipe down here at the GNAT office in Sunderland. Next, we're gonna add the chicken stock. At this point, you can either do chicken stock, you can do veggie stock, you can do shrimp stock, you can do fish stock, lobster stock, whatever you want. I've got a cup and a quarter of chicken stock here, and I just used bouillon because it's super easy. And then, so I poured that in and I'm gonna get it cooking. And then my recipe says to use Tabasco, a half teaspoon of Tabasco, but this is my favorite hot sauce. It's a Cajun hot sauce, Crystal. I really love it. I order it online because I can't get it locally, so it's maybe a little bit less spicy than Tabasco, but it's really awesome, and I don't measure, I just go for it. If I were you, I'd order this online or somewhere locally maybe. I love it on everything. So I'm gonna let that simmer for a few minutes, let that cook well. I'm bringing it to a boil. So I've got my shrimp in this beautiful pottery. That's from Flower Brook Pottery in Dorset. Really love this bowl. It was gifted to me by a dear friend, Marley Mason, for our wedding. My husband and I actually just got married about a month ago in April, and we honeymooned in New Orleans. So I really love New Orleans. I love the food there, and this is just a celebration of my love of that place. Unfortunately, on our honeymoon, I was really sick, so I didn't get to enjoy the food very much, but I get to take it home with me, and it's another excuse to go back there. So our étouffée is bubbling. I'm gonna add the shrimp in. I'm also gonna add the green onion and the parsley. It's not the best cutting board to do this with, but. And we're gonna let that cook for another about 5 minutes just to get these shrimp cooked all the way. And now you can pretty much just chill because it's pretty hard to mess it up after that. I just let it simmer. I don't even bother really messing with it. Let the shrimp cook. The shrimp, if you don't know, shrimp will get pink once it's cooked. So it's pretty easy to tell when it's done. And then you get to eat. I'm going to shout out another pottery place. This bowl is from Berkshire Pottery down in Massachusetts. One of my favorite pottery places as well. And I'm going to serve the dish up in this Berkshire Pottery bowl. I'm going to serve my rice into my bowl in preparation. And this, my friends, is done. We've got ourselves some étouffée. And it's as simple as that. One bowl or one big pot besides your rice maker. You put your rice in a bowl and then you serve your étouffée, which is right on top of your rice. It's going to be kind of like a stew. It's definitely got a little bit of stewness to it, but it's not quite, it's not extremely liquidy. Sometimes it's a little thicker than others. And maybe it doesn't look perfectly beautiful, but when you taste it, it's freaking beautiful. So thank you so much for joining me tonight to cook étouffée. I really enjoyed sharing my recipe with you, and it's an honor to cook here at GNAT. I hope you can think of something that you want to cook and come into the studio and cook something to share with Vermont. It's been really wonderful. Thank you.